Hey everybody, I'm going to talk about how to write a book review today. So let's get at it. Um, One of the things I love about book reviews is they just make me share what it means to find something, the kernel, if you will, what it means to find the kernel or the thought that allows me and a reader to share perspective. Oftentimes with a good laugh, you can get a fun, funky turn of phrase as to how that works for you. We'll look at a couple examples, so let's run through. First of all, as you see on the bottom, thanks to the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill Writing Center for much of the material. It was an excellent website. Highly recommend you look further if you want more tips, more explanations, and even some exercises. The essentials are that we provide a concise summary of the book, and I'm going to also broaden out many of these same principles for those of you that want to write a film review. You can pretty much deduce from your own logic that probably 80% of this will cross over and apply to film as well. Yes, in the case, the concise plot of most films, right? But notice I'm using the word trajectory. It just means the way that the book is moving toward a goal or theme. Again, we think of typical movement of a literary device toward the climax and denouement, which is the way the book wraps up. In this case, not necessarily chronological, but often helpful if you are kind of mapping out. So making mention of how many chapters, book length perhaps, the layout, whether it's in sections, that can help people and again serve that audience. I say again, well, I'm going to emphasize it again and again, even though it's the first time I mention it. Underscore the author's conveyed perspective, argument, or purpose. Notice that not the same, not always. Sometimes there's an argument, sometimes there's more a purpose, more sometimes it's just a sharing perspective, more first person. Whatever it is, even if it's a combination, think about making sure your reader, your audience senses that's what it's about. Oh, okay, so that's what it's about. Now, sometimes it's a trick. You don't want to give away everything. Sometimes you don't want to bore people. Sometimes you're making that decision as to how much to share, and that's the cleverness of a book review, meaning you have to think, how would I want to be treated if I were to get this material? Now, often with fiction, we need to be careful of not spilling the beans and going too much in detail of certain scenes or, of course, the conclusion. But the overall point, the gist, I think it's fair game. Theme is good because we need clarity. Well, again, we're trying to equip somebody to make a decision. They don't want to waste their time. Do they pick up the book or not? You're helping them do that. Share a thoughtful, considered, and most often balanced assessment. Your job is to assess. Your job is to report. And your job is to do so with a sense of decorum. They don't know you from anyone. So you need to show your reasoning process. And that's why most often balanced is the way to go. Can you pop off? Yes. Should you sometimes? Yes. Is it often? No. So usually we're thinking about working through the data and then coming to that conclusion. We want to obviously review the content, but we want to most of all think of content matching to a particular audience. So constantly think of a review in terms of closing your eyes and saying, who's listening to this? Who's the person that I'm reaching? Who's this match up with? And write for them. And sometimes you can write for more than one audience. You could say, hey, it's really good for these. If you're looking for this, this will match. If you're looking for this, not so much. All right, the means, how-tos, if you will. Present expertise by reasoning your criteria. Be sure to upfront exactly how you're going to measure this. Does it have to be extensive? No. So it can be, all of these moves can sometimes be within a sentence. What I just mentioned up on top could be 2, 3, 4 sentences, probably 3, 4. Usually in a review on Amazon, it's going to be your first paragraph to give the who, what, where, when, why of the summary, the author's intent and perspective, and an assessment is going to shift more to the second paragraph. Are you going to reason your criteria? Probably in that second assessment paragraph, fairly upfront, right? If you go for a 2-paragraph format. Share praise and criticism, always have backed by evidence. How much is enough? Very interesting. On a 2-paragraph with Amazon, we're probably not going to quote extensively the material, right? If it's a New York Times book review and more extensive, which I'm allowing this particular lecture to kind of lean toward both points, well, of course, it's going to have plenty of quotes. In our case, for the postings we're doing for this project, it's going to be short. So you're not quoting very much, if at all. Qualifying claims, though, making sure that you're able to say something, but say it with some backing and say it with some nuance. So To what extent is a better phrasing than saying this is the way it is? Most times. Employ rhetorics, and let me go through these. These are ones that I've worked with students over the years on, and ones I recommend. Bet you didn't know is the idea of revealing a fact that most people would not know. Problem solution, we've talked dozens of times ad nauseum. You're probably like, man, he really loves this problem stuff. But it's basically, is there a gap? Is there a problem where with time, a cost of time, labor, status, health, money? Because if there is, man, we got a problem, right? So most times that's what you want to emphasize and make sure people feel that they're gamed into and therefore interested in hearing more. So if this book solves those kind of problems, then state it. If this book creates some of those problems, state it. Maybe emphasize uniqueness. Zeitgeist is the culture of the time. Maybe you're emphasizing how things kind of fit in. It's a moment of hip hop, right? Where it feels like it's the right time and place. Taylor Swift's latest album, more unplugged, more personal. Maybe it matches the times. Eminence is just the idea of it being right in my face. It's something so immediate. So, for example, going back to COVID, anything with safety and anything dealing with pandemic or viral issues, right? Even the idea of that word virus, probably it's going to fit. All right. Problem example. Judith Butler's Ale, Beer, and Brewsters in England, Women's Work is a Changing World, 13 to 1600, investigates how women used to brew and sell the majority of ale drunk in England. Historically, ale and beer were important elements of the English diet. Ale brewing was low skill, low status labor, was complementary to women's domestic responsibilities. In the early 15th century, brewers began to make ale with hops. They called the new drink beer. The technique allowed brewers to produce beverages at lower cost, sell them more easily, although women generally stopped brewing once the business became more profitable. What do we got? We got a pile of facts. We don't have an angle. We don't have a sense of the overall theme or thrust. We kind of get it by hint, by slant, but really we got to go digging for it. It's the idea that maybe women are getting hosed here in the sense once it becomes profitable, men take over. But it's not explicit. There's no sense of voice or assessment. You're not steering a ship. You're simply delivering facts. And it's somewhat subjectively, right? It's just kind of like walking in an antique shop where there's no organization, like there's all the curiosities that are sort of piled in different places and you're trying to figure your way through. No categories, no sense of knowing what's first, second, third. Let's look at the second example problem. You'll see it fairly quickly, and I'm not going to necessarily read the whole thing. I'll kind of let you scan it with me. But here we've got the title, and then it was what? A colossal disappointment, just flat out with the assessment. Is that all is wrong? No, but it can be dangerous ground because now we're kind of, might be cheap shotting. So let's keep going. I wanted to know about the rituals surrounding drinking in medieval England, songs, games, and parties. Bennett provided none of the information. Well, you wanted to know about that, but would the average reader wanting to pick up this book want to know about it? That's the key thing. Overly subjective. And you got a caveat. It's okay that you like that and you wanted that. It's okay that it's slightly idiosyncratic. We know that Amazon reviews are pretty much that, unfortunately, to excess. But it's not just a journal. It's not an entry where I'm going to pop off with my own subjective space. I'm trying to serve an audience, and I'm trying to think carefully about whether this book matches a certain audience. And so I'm making the argument more for them than for me. And that's the important distinction. So when you're making these reviews, make sure you're thinking that way. So I like the book, how it showed an ale and beer as an economic activity. Okay, we got a little bit of revelation as to what it's about, but the reader gets lost in the details of prices and wages. Again, not a bad assessment. I was more interested in the private lives of women brewsters. Okay, you were. Why? I don't know. No reasoning. The book was divided into 8 long chapters. I can't imagine why anyone would ever want to read it. Too much of a cheap shot, right? Obviously, this was published. Obviously, some people were there, and it's a little too dismissed. Is it all right for you to be extreme, to say this wasn't worth it, to give it a 1 star? Absolutely. Is it right for you to just cheap shot in general phrases like, no, anyone would want to read it? You're implying length is bad. Length can be good sometimes, so that's not enough. So we need a little more. Let's go look at the third example that gives us a little sense of maybe how we can kind of move those areas together. So one of feminism's paradox is one that challenges optimistic histories is how patriarchy remains persistent over time. We're going for a big umbrella theme, right? And we're not even talking about the book yet, but we know that's coming, right? It's going to lean off of that, the idea of patriarchy. And look at the language. It's got a little bit of play here, one that challenges its optimistic histories, right? Judith, and the name of the title, which I'm not going to repeat, recognizes medieval women as historical actors through their ale brewing. Look at again, the sophistication there, historical actors. It also shows female agency had its limits with the advent of beer. We're clear about the topic, clear about women being somewhat partitioned here and put in a slot, right? Only allowed a certain amount of modality and agency in this particular world. So it's clear we're steering, we got a theme, we've got a direction. We have, if you will, author's perspective purpose of this piece. So we go on. I had assumed those limits were religious and political, but Bennett shows how patriarchal equilibrium shut women out of economic life as well. A select quote, really smartly done. And the subjective here is okay because, all right, you assumed it. Maybe a lot of your readers are assuming it, and you're kind of doing a wink because you know that. You're playing yourself in to be more first person, but with the idea that people can tag along with that first person saying, yeah, I'd probably assume that, or I could see how I'm thinking that way too, right? And if not, people still give you usually a little bit of grace. So a little bit of subjectivity is okay. The other ones were swamped, right? They were too much and they weren't reasoned through. All right, I should say the second review of problem that we looked at just prior to this. So her analysis of women's wages and ale and beer production proves that a change in women's work does not equate to a change in women's status. Wow, really nicely again phrased. One change doesn't equal the other change. Contemporary feminists and historians alike should read Bennett's book and think twice when they crack open their next brewski. A little bit of play with the vernacular, right? But sophistication on both ends, showing different registers a person can use in language, more fun, colloquial, cash, and then, if you will, high end of more academic monikers, phrases, and labels that have a little bit of play and smart placement. So look at what that last sentence is doing. It's incredibly good to kind of mimic and think about that. Contemporary feminists and historians alike, who's that? Oh, the audience. Oh, the people that might get something out of this. I'm going to name them. I'm going to categorize. I'm going to say this might fit, right? So good to think about how you can say this fits or doesn't fit with a certain group. All right, let's walk through just 2 more slides here of the prep. Let's ask these questions before you start. What's the thesis argument of the book? I want you to look at the third sentence on that. I'm sorry, I'm going to come back to it. How does it compare and contrast to the world you know? It's okay to have that sort of personal reflective moment. It's such a good idea. Second main question, what exactly is the subject or topic of the book? Pretty important. Now, in an Amazon review, we're not going to have to get the title and the author because it's already there. We'll look at that in a moment. But, you know, the subject and topic might not be clear from the title. You might just help out with that. Do you have to necessarily go through a lot of heavy lifting on an Amazon review? No, right? A lot of that lifting's already done in the other material that's already on that particular page. How does the author support their argument? Probably helpful. I love methodology. I eat this up. As a scholar, I want to know if there's good data. I want to know how it was collected. Was it representative? Was it thorough? Are there enough quantification? If we're doing surveys, how many? Over what kind of timeline? All really, really helpful. I like to look and compare and contrast. You'll see the last question here says, does any of the author's information conclusions conflict with any other books you've read on the topic? Also helpful, showing expertise, compare and contrast with other works. How do they structure their argument? It's kind of similar to supporting, except now you're thinking about the parts and you're thinking about the chapters and section heads and the progression of the argument. Has the book helped you understand the subject? Who is the author? Sorry, no question mark, but yes, it is a question. Who is the author? Does the book fit within a genre? Is it matching up with other stuff? Again, similar to the other questions that we've had. Would this book be relevant to a particular audience? It's also a very, very helpful question. And what unspoken rules do the reviewers on the website seem to follow? Look at other website samples because that's going to be pretty darn important, right? Yeah, relevant to a particular audience is the bell ringer of all the questions. We are ultimately tailoring for them what the argument is, the subject, the author, how they're supported and structured the argument, right? And the background of the author. All these are key gifts, if you will, of information to help them make the decision. Do I buy? Do I not? Do I watch? Do I not? Really, really good stuff. All right, last but not least, writing. We're going to share the author, title, and theme. We're going to provide relevant details in the genre. Okay, really important to get just the basics, but we get them out quick and we get them out really easy. Now, do I need to share the author, title, and theme all the time? Not always. Theme, I'd still say 80% of the time. Theme, by what I mean, argument, purpose, perspective. You can kind of, if you will, cross all those points I've used and mentioned earlier in our time together. Anchor the context is probably really good. So if you're talking Cuban Revolution, are we going to frame it by talking about how it compares and contrasts with what's going on in the US? Is that the context we want to think about? Or what's going on in Latin America? Yeah, pick your context, make sure they understand the context. Underscore the thesis of I've said it 1,000 times. Yeah, what's the book's about? What's its purpose, perspective? or thesis, right? And interpret, exclamation point, yeah, deliver your thesis, and that's crossing right to this point, because now we've got to come in with your assessment. If you've done your who, what, where, and why, here's the genre, here's the author, here's their background, here's how it compares to other work in this area or subject related. Here's the basic thesis. Now it's time for me, right? It's time for you to now call balls and strikes. You've served your audience the facts. You've told them the who, what, where, when, why, how. It's time to deliver the real why, right? Is it worth it? Or the so what kind of answer to that question, so what? Proclaim it. All right. Possibly think screenshot, possibly quote, page number, links. Folks, it's more unique. It stands out. It's interesting. Amazon sometimes doesn't allow this. Be careful. Understand that there are limits, because there's so many self-promoters out there that will bomb Amazon with stupid websites. So that's a problem there. But you could get some of that material Goodreads. And if you're posting for a film on Rotten Tomatoes, yeah, probably going to work for you. All right, page numbers are really helpful, guys, because sometimes it drives people to look specifically for that in the Google preview, Amazon preview or Google Books. Final tips, cliffs, not to fall off. Review the book in front of you, not the book you wish they'd written. You're not going to win a gripe session. This person took time. It has shortcomings and failures, but you don't need to just simply criticize it for something. It never was meant to be. Precise, please. Precision in language, big time. Offer a clear take. We got to know where you're coming from. RESPECT. We're going to respect the audience, and we're going to respect the author. So nobody wants to waste their time. Help them not waste their time. Tell them if it's a pickup or not. And tell which audience it might be a pickup for, which is probably more realistic. Some people like this stuff, even if you didn't like it. Explain the difference. All right, and the author, always think about valuing agreement and disagreement. And that, look, a bad book, I love this phrase, takes as long as a good one to write, right? Harsh judgments, not so nice. Why bother, right? Life's short. We don't need to be too harsh. But on the flip side, we need to get truth. So if it's terrible, okay, then I guess tell me it's terrible. Let's look at an Amazon review. So we've got A River Runs Through It, Other Stories, May 16, 2017, Norman McLean. Robert Redford, interesting writing in the foreword, because I believe he was a director and or participated in the film. I can't remember. I believe it was going back in the day with Brad Pitt. Anyway, it's a wonderful, storyline here of compilations, and we get the who, what, where, when, why here on the top. We also see that Amazon review is going to give us a lot of material, right? It's going to do comparative works, the editorial reviews. As you prep, please read this, but also note that information is going to be pretty much in the hands of most reviewers, so you don't need to repeat a lot of what's in here. You might compare and contrast with it, though, and you might get ideas from it. You might repeat that, yes, I agree with the editorial review, blah, blah, blah. Look at the page length. What should have been 220, 200? Should have been shorter? Should have longer? I don't know. Maybe comment. Again, think about that. Maybe comment in response to this right over here. You might say, hey, I noticed 80% of the people on the site said it was 5-star. I believe it's 4-star. Here's why. It's showing that a little bit of contrast, also giving people information that you're going to be a little bit part of a minority or part of the majority. We'll see the first review. Again, we're giving the stars. We see that a little bit of laziness here, and the title is the same as the first few lines. The reviewer is using some good language, but there's some gaps here. So it's absolutely beautiful book. We're okay. A little superlative, but we're going to run. Sitting in my local coffee shop with blotchy cheeks and mascara running down my face. Hey, it's okay to be even visceral, even fairly sentimental in expression. I'm going to go a little bit of a pass, even though I think, at this point, I'm not sure this is going to bleed into subjectivity and be somebody sort of paying of praise to this great work, or is it going to be objective? So you might lose a little bit of bargaining chip there in terms of it being something you can work with. Here, the person says, I don't usually write reviews, but I'm compelled to write one for this book. I am a writer, not a fisherman. So that's an interesting point. Let's keep going. I don't actually really like fishing, know anything about it, but that didn't make me any less spellbound. Cool fact. That's working because maybe you represent a lot of what other people would have, which is, I don't fish. Is this really my book? So you're helping that person make that decision, even if they're not that type of person. Cool. Writing is gorgeous, precise, and sly. I love the word sly. But so unexpectedly beautiful, logical, funny, and emotional. I'm thinking there's a lot of adjectives to run through. I'm kind of there, I'm kind of not, because you have to support a lot of that if you're really going to give me some money. It reads differently than the books I'm used to reading. There's no foul suspense, showing a little sophistication in language here, right? No fake suspense, no trick, shock value, beautiful story. Okay, I like it, but it's a lot of assertions and claims without a lot of money yet. I'm not sure how and where, right? Show me the book. Give me a little bit of how, so, where, All right, so we go a little on the downside. Should be at least one little caveat, and this person has enough knowledge of the genre to kind of at least do a little bit of, hey, I love it, but okay, there might be a little bit of window where it's not quite there. So it took me a while to get completely invested. I'd say I'd read the first 30 pages slowly, and then the remainder all at once. I know this isn't a great book review, but just wanted to add my opinion. I'm a 26-year-old female, works in the tech industry. Great idea to front who you are. And then talked about a fishing experience when she was a 7. I'm not so sure that's relevant, but it's funny because she cried for 2 days. I don't know, maybe, depending on if you like that subjectivity. I tend to not like it, but I'm not going to grade you down if you go with a little bit of dash of your own self with personality, humor, otherwise, as long as it doesn't swamp the boat. Love the book, grade it, don't discount it because it's about fishing. Well, you've said that about 3 times. I'm getting a little redundant here, but okay. Let's go to the one slightly better here. This is one of my all-time favorite books. It's in the category of novellas. I immediately have a genre. It's been noted by other reviewers. Here we go. When I give it as a gift to other people, it's not about religion, though it's deeply spiritual. Number 2, it's not about fly fishing. Number 3, it has one of the most interesting backdrops. Oh, those are merely backdrops. All right. And then lastly, rivers and waters are indeed a metaphorical vehicle for the central message. So we have the theme, almost purpose, almost sensibility of the book. We have the genre. We have a lot of movement in it quickly. Could be a little bit more, maybe do a little bit about author. But I like the idea that it can be a slightly oblique. It's going to be pulled on in the next paragraph, but it doesn't get pulled. I wish we would just pulled on a little bit of how it's metaphorical, maybe more thematic, but now we give it to people. Now we're talking about an audience. It's still not bad. Still acknowledging that, hey, it's going to work for these kind of people. So young men and brothers is who he gives the book to. Okay. Maybe a little bit why. Not really shared as to why. No backing on that, but oh well. All right. I get moved with the storyline, similar to my own experience. That's really great for you. It's a journal entry, but I don't think it's a review. In other words, how and why does that affect me? Unless I know enough about you to say I'm like you, I don't really know. Here we go. Here's the big one. Spoiler alert. This becomes a choice, guys, as to whether or not we do this, right? Do we share or do we don't? Okay, it's most regrets that one day or not we'll try to save someone dear to us who needs saving, but we know they can't not save them. Who we know are helpless to save. I had that all my life, as he says. Perhaps it's a sibling with a substance abuse, a gambler, or something, and so on. Very cool. I had 2 reactions when I went over this with a class. Our class earlier, if you're listening, I don't know who's going to be listening to this eventually, but yeah, guys, is this good idea to kind of say, oh, it's going to be about that? Is that going to spoil the whole book? I kind of think not in this case because it's just categorizing toward a person that would say, hey, it's going to have this big theme, but it's right on the knife's edge because you might say, oh my God, it's trying to tell me that it's basically about a codependent, so I got a game here. And you're kind of telling me that person's not going to be saved. So do we have to go that far to tell the kind of conclusion that somebody's probably not going to make it? Because that might take away from it, right? All right, so that's my thought on that. And now let's go to film. If you are doing film, make sure we got a director. Often producers are good, but actors for sure. Where does the acting take place or the setting is pretty important. We need to know the genre. Is it action, film, comedy, rom-com, something like that? Always good to think about an arc, like where it develops dramatically. If it's a storyline, getting that is there an unexpected aspect of it, an ending, beginning, or otherwise. Not bad. Maybe go there. What I like, what I didn't, always pretty interesting. You got to back it up right away because otherwise those lines just become, like I said, ooh, just you, and we don't know you. So how do I know if this is useful for me, right? If I'm the audience. So that's why it's so important to back those claims up or explain who you is, right? Why you represent a lot of other people. All right, guys, hope that was helpful. Take care.